Now we're going to talk about the INFP personality type in session 29. We're going to move on from people who use accuracy to people who use authenticity. But we're still in the introverted perceiver quadrant of the firm model. So we're still talking about rightness. But we're going to talk about authenticity and exploration and how that manifests. So we've already mentioned authenticity when we were talking about ENFPs and ESFPs, and we talked about it as a co-pilot. But for INFPs, this is their driver process. And this is, again, what's true to who I am. As you can imagine, if it's your driver or flow state, people of this type are very introspective. They're checking in with themselves all the time. They're really figuring out how they are emotionally responding to the world around them. Now, they get a very sensitive ear, right? A very sensitive instrument for how things are impacting them in a very nuanced way. You can imagine if, just like we talked about with sensation people, that they get they get really good at picking things up in a very nuanced way, like arrays of colors or very granular tastes and flavors. Authenticity does this, but with parts inside of them, with all of the chorus of the parts inside. And what they're looking for fundamentally, what they're really looking for is a feeling of alignment, inner alignment, when all the parts are saying, yes, that's the thing that I want. That is fundamentally what they're trying to determine. When are all my parts in alignment? When is everything inside of me screaming that this is the right thing to do? Now, it takes time to do this because we are always conflicted. There are so many different things inside of us. There are so many different components inside of us that say, yeah, I want to get out of bed. No, I want to pull the covers up. Yeah, I want to go exercise. No, I want to stay and eat potato chips and, watch Biggest Loser again or something. There are always schisms within us. And most of us just kind of take that for granted, right? We're just like, yeah, well, today I made it to the gym and yesterday I didn't. However, to an authenticity person, these voices inside are very important. They're looking at them on a granular level. They're really taking in the inner landscape of all of these different dissenting parts. And they're trying to find things, right? They're trying to be inspired by things that will make all of their parts come together and say, yes, that is right. That is the right thing. Now, when we talk about things that feel right, which is very subjective, right? We're very subjective experience. We're not talking about things that merely feel good. In fact, if an authenticity person is using what feels good as a litmus test, they're generally at a very low level of development. It's not about what feels good. It is specifically what feels right. And since right is a term that indicates how the world should be, like all the judging processes do, because right is determining how things should be, ethics become very important to authenticity. Good, bad, good and evil, right, wrong. These are considerations that an authenticity person spends a lot of time ruminating over. And really what it is, the right thing to do when everything in your body is saying, yes, that's right. That is the thing that we need to be doing. Now, because they're introverted, okay, they're not going to show up as somebody who wants to come in and take over a room. In fact, they're very sensitive to other people's individuality and expression because they're so in touch with their own individuality. They're so in touch with what's going on inside of them. They have a natural respect and honor for the individual person. So they're not somebody who just naturally shows up and takes over. However, when they get inspired to do something, when something hits that inner core of authenticity, when everything feels in alignment, now they have to do it. Now there's no question. Even if they die trying, that is the thing they have to do. And so they fundamentally make up almost all of the archetype of the reluctant hero, which is I have to do this, I don't want to do this, but everything inside of me is telling me that I have to. Now, when you pair the authenticity process with exploration, which is an intuitive process, which says, show me the possibilities, show me what's happening. I want to know every combination. I want to know every possible combination. I want to know what if. Show me a bigger landscape. Zoom out. Let's see a bigger terrain. And remember how we talked about exploration being optimistic? Because exploration sees things as they could be. When you combine authenticity with exploration, now you get the quintessential idealist. Now you get somebody who believes that they have to accomplish a goal just because they feel it so strongly, combined with a a process that helps them vision what that could look like. This could look like something completely different than it currently is, and I know deep inside of me that we can make that happen. So you combine these two things, and now you get the idealistic visionary, the person who holds the dream, the person who's inspiring everybody else to do the impossible. It's been the INFPs that have helped us create worlds that we said would never happen. I have a couple of acquaintances that systemize the concept of peace in order to try to bring peace to the world in a way that wasn't overly idealistic. It had like this concept of many different tiers of conflict, and world peace doesn't have to be that everybody's singing Kumbaya. It could just be that we're not actually physically conflicting, that we're more mimetically conflicting and talking it through and maybe arguing, but we're not actually like hitting each other with rocks, right? And it was an INFP that was a part of that just really believed that that could happen. And they did pretty good stuff. And INFPs usually do. They almost always do far more than anybody would give them credit for. And because it's an internal process, because it's subjective, they're not checking in with whether or not something is working or effective. They're not checking in with social consensus to tell them whether or not they can do this thing. They're just going to do it. Just like accuracy cannot ask common sense, cannot ask the social component to influence its thoughts. It's got to figure out what is true all by itself so that it can go through and bulldoze a completely erroneous belief without saying like, you know, well, maybe I shouldn't do that because that's what everybody believes. It can't think that. In order to be a superpower, it has to ignore that social component. It's the same thing with authenticity. If somebody says something is impossible, it is authenticity's job to not care. Okay? If effectiveness comes along and says, there's no way that we possibly have the resources to make this happen, you're massively under-resourced, there's no way that you can possibly gain all of the people it will take and all the things that it will take, the time, effort, etc. to make it happen, it is authenticity driver's job to ignore that information. Okay, and that's when they hit their superpower. But only if it is with exploration, because exploration will give it a bigger context and also figure out all the possible ways of doing it. Okay, well, we can't do it in the traditional way. Well, what if we go up, round, over? Like, what if we go under? Who knows? But what are all the possible ways that we can get there? And when they continue to use exploration to help test. Now, it's not a test iterate like accuracy. Accuracy is looking to measure. It's not test iterate. It's more just, let's just do everything we have to do to make this thing happen. That's when they have a superpower. So you see these people who are very sweet, very kind, leading with a feeling process of authenticity, but just getting extraordinary things done. They're generally an INFP. Now, what happens when they don't go to exploration and they go their 10-year-old of memory? Well, what happens is generally comfort seeking. There is a fine line between doing what feels right and doing what feels good, all right? And authenticity, as it grows, gets closer and closer to what feels right, even if it doesn't feel good. And exploration helps it do that. But if they don't want to go out in the outside world, if they don't want their idealistic, romantic, concepts smushed, right? If they don't want the world to give them feedback that tells them they can't do it, and if they don't want the world to give them feedback that makes them believe that they might be wrong in their assertions, they'll go to the memory process and stay with what is physically comfortable to them. Now, this looks a little different than the INTP that will do this on a mimetic level. They'll use what they already know to justify a concept of what is true. Authenticity will go to memory to justify feeling good, all right? So this looks more self-indulgent. This looks like, staying home and reading Dostoevsky and maybe reading some philosophy books and never venturing out of the house if at all possible. It wants to keep this concept of idealism, and it won't let the world trample on it. When really the world isn't there to trample on idealism, it's there to refine it. So exploration is a part of the refining process, and that's why it's healthy for an INFP. And the 10-year-old process of memory is not good because it keeps the INFP in a sense of romanticized fog. It keeps them in a place of comfort, which is not where they're going to get their big game, dreams met. They're not going to be able to make incredible things happen despite all the naysayers because they're just going to be staying at home and doing nothing. However, we all use our 10-year-old in a time of intimacy. The way that an ITP does that with the memory process is that they'll use They'll use the memory process to create stability with another person in a relationship. All right. They'll use them as safe. Whenever memory is the 10-year-old, to use it as intimacy is when you create a feeling of safety and home with that other person. An INTP does the same thing. They go to memory to create intimacy by having this other person be their mate, be their sense of home. And authenticity does the same thing. They use memory to create a sense of safety and a sense of home with this other person. Now, as a 3-year-old for effectiveness, again, it's just like it's accuracy's job to ignore harmony, right, in order to figure out truth. It's authenticity's job to ignore effectiveness when effectiveness says there's no way you can make it happen. However, effectiveness is still part of that polarity. It's still showing up for the INFP. And the way it oftentimes looks for an INFP is that if it's in a bad way, right, and they're stressed out, you'll see the INFP get uncharacteristically demanding or bossy. I usually use the word petulant. All right. I had one of my closest friends on the planet was an INFP, and she just always had, I mean, whenever we went out, she was like, yeah, we'll do whatever you guys want to do, like no problem, very laid back, very easygoing. And then all of a sudden she'd want something. And if she couldn't get what she wanted, she would do anything to get it. She would pout. She would manipulate. She would do absolutely anything possible in order to get that desire met. Because once authenticity decides they want something, once they decide that all of their parts are in alignment, they are an unmovable force. They want it so bad it is a part of their identity. And if they don't get it, if they can't have it, it's like their whole identity is being rent in two. That's how painful it is for them. Right. And for those of you, by the way, that were authenticity co-pilots, when you get better and better at authenticity, that's how you're going to feel about it. All right. You're going to want something so bad. You're going to be directed towards that thing so bad that if you don't get it, it will feel like you're being rent in two. Very uncomfortable feeling for ENFPs and ESFPs. Very uncomfortable, but where you want to go. And that's not a bad thing. Having your heart set on something, emotionally desiring it to a point where there is no reason around it is how you get impossible things to happen. All right, that's how miracles happen. So that's how the process works. However, if authenticity can't get what it wants, it will do anything possible to use effectiveness to make it happen. And that's how it's, that's how it shows up as a 3-year-old. However, when it shows up in a healthy way, this is when they get through the to-do list. This is when they just keep working to make it happen. And that's generally how the aspiration works, is they want to make something huge happen. Their idealism makes them want to make something major happen, and they just work tirelessly to get there, even if they're not particularly systematic about it. That's how the aspiration shows up. However, if they're just trying to detox, if they're just trying to give their authenticity a break for a little bit, and they got to go to the 3-year-old in order to, to just like get out of their idealism or their emotional space, and they've got to get into a to-do space or like an effectiveness space, they can do it by going through very simple to-do list items. They can clear out their email inbox, right? I've seen authenticity people just spend an hour cleaning out their inbox, and they feel so good afterwards. They can just do basically something that is a small chore or a small series of chores that isn't too demanding, but they just start ticking things off of that to-do list that is very simple, and generally that's what it takes for them to detox. You wouldn't think ticking things off your to-do list would be the thing that is restful for you, but for INFPs it generally is. So you want to go to the effectiveness place for aspiration, for rest and relaxation from authenticity, but not to manipulate, to pout, or to make something happen through passive-aggressive means. Okay, so that's the INFP version. And again, they want to be right, okay? So that's very important. I would even say that authenticity is more insecure about its rightness than accuracy is, because accuracy at least has data points. Authenticity doesn't have data points. It just has feelings, right? I feel this strongly. So they feel even more marginalized when somebody doesn't care what they think is right. They feel even more marginalized and defensive of their rightness because they can't explain it even like an accuracy person could. Accuracy could at least debate it, right? They could show you all the, they can line up all the reasons, and you're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Authenticity just feels it strongly. So they may feel even more insecure about their rightness, and that might make them double down even harder. They might even more so ignore outer world feedback. to convince their driver of something different. So it's very important for an authenticity driver to make sure they're staying in their co-pilot of getting that experience, expanding that view, right? Getting bigger territory in order to fuel authenticity, to make better distinctions about what makes them feel right. Because if they have more experiences, right, that's going to change how they feel. And that means that they'll get closer to not just doubling down on being right, which of course, what happens, that 360 happens where we go to being just spectacularly wrong. The more they experience, the more refinement they get in that feeling, and the more they can determine what is truly right for them and what they want to really focus on and bring to the world. All right, so now let's talk about how authenticity shows up for an ISFP or with the sensation process in the next session.